keeps a very sharp eye on the world. Zahid Hussain, writer, journalist, author. His last book, The Scorpion's Tale, was widely read and well regarded. And last but not least, Christopher Bibelege, who is an author, an expert, a journalist, a man of the world, fluent in several languages, and he's come here because of his latest book, The Islamic Enlightenment, and it is enlightening indeed. Welcome to all of you. And I'm Doucet, just a journalist who happens to like Afghanistan. So let's turn to our first geopolitical cartographer, Leonard. We have a world in which, of course, where one of the fulcrums of the world, in Washington, is now led by a president whose motto is America First. On day one of the Lahore Literary Festival, there was a lot of attention to a Trumpian world. We want to look mostly in this session at something beyond the world of Trump. Because, you know, as a Canadian, I have to say, it does exist. To you, Leonard.
Thank you very much. With a phrase which you hear a lot in Washington at the moment, and that is the idea of the international liberal order. So I think it's fair to say that this order was never really international. A lot of countries weren't in it. It wasn't always super liberal because it encompassed support for a lot of very dodgy regimes around the world, particularly during the Cold War. And it wasn't always an order. In fact, for children born this century, they, I think, probably associate the United States more with disorder than order as a result of the wars in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Libya, and other places. But there was a sense, both in America and in every other security theatre, that the US was part of the furniture and was one of the things that gave us structure and predictability to relations between different players. And though there were all sorts of regional rivalries between the other powers, they tended to be held within that bigger context. So during the Cold War, they were sublimated to the rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union, and after the Cold War, the US was the primus inter pares in every single region of the world. And I think what we're seeing now is not just the crazy misogyny and unpredictability and all the other Trumpian characteristics that we talked about in the open session now, but I think a more fundamental structural change, which is that Donald Trump is the first president of the United States, certainly in my lifetime, who thinks that this so-called order, which was created around the world, is not an amplifier of American influence and something which benefits the United States. It is in fact something designed to weaken the United States and to empower the weak against the strong and to give the US a bad deal in every region of the world. And I think what we're seeing now is not the US disappearing lock, stock and barrel from every other continent, but seriously recalibrating its role, shrinking its objectives, talking about America first, and that has created a major amount of confusion in the foreign policy elites in every other part of the world. And I think that's the sort of job for cartographers, is to help them think about a new world where they can't rely on the United States in the way that they were used to, and where there are all sorts of other powers coming in. So if you think about Europe, you know, we've had a number of conflicts in the European continent in the last decade, wars in Georgia, in Ukraine, and the United States has given not much more than rhetorical support to Europeans. It has pushed Angela Merkel and the French into the front line to deal with those sorts of conflicts. It's very different from the sort of role that the US played, whether it was on Bosnia or Kosovo or during the Cold War. In the Middle East and North Africa, you're seeing a similar recalibration of the role of the United States. It's still a big player there, but it's no longer the kind of structuring player. It's one that other countries try and drag into different conflicts in different ways. But the kind of core powers in the Middle East and North Africa are now Iran and Saudi Arabia, and they're the ones that, and their proxy wars with each other are structuring the political situation, geopolitical situation in the region, along with these two non-Western European powers, Russia and Turkey, who are also emancipating themselves both from NATO and from the European Union and playing a quite different role, both within Europe and the Balkans and all sorts of other places, but also. I think the most interesting question is about China and the role that it is playing, and the fact that as everybody else seems to be pulling back, talking about America first, recalibrating their roles, you see this monumental project in the Belt and Road Initiative, which is designed to create a level of economic intimacy between China and pretty much every other country in the world. And it's a very interesting relationship. In some ways, it is modelled on the US relationship. It's not a relationship of equals. What the Chinese are trying to do is to create bilateral relationships with every other country in the world through soft infrastructure and hard infrastructure. The hard infrastructure of pipelines, railways, motorways, ports, and the soft infrastructure of development banks, political deals, regional summits. But what that creates is a world where China can deal with every single country in the world from a position of strength, and where China creates a world without America, with itself at the centre. I think maybe I'll just end with the fact that it's fascinating talking about these things in Pakistan, because throughout most of my life, people have talked about Pakistan needing to catch up and become more like other countries. But I think in many ways, Pakistan is the front runner for this new world. You have managed these complex relationships with the US and with China for a very long period of time. There have been ups and downs in these relationships. And I remember being very struck a couple of years ago. I was with Hina at some conference, and Xi Jinping was visiting the UK. And the British government were prostrating themselves at his feet and trying to build up a new kind of relationship. They're talking about a new dawn in British-China relationships. And Hina pointed out that this felt a bit like some of the set-piece events between Pakistan and China in the UK. So I think in this kind of crazy, unpredictable new world, rather than being a kind of developing country that's trying to catch up with the rest, Pakistan might be a kind of model for the future, which other countries are trying to catch up with and emulate.
If indeed Pakistan is, as Mark said, a model for the world, it is a country, and all of you know this well, which has, throughout its history, been juggling its alliances, its enemies and friends. And all of you know how through the decades, America is, to be kind, I suppose, a fickle friend. You've had your ups and downs. And now it may perhaps be one of the biggest downs, where the president tweets from the White House that Pakistan takes all of our money and does double-speak in return. And so he says these days are over. But Pakistan has often said in these rough times, we don't need the United States, we have other friends. And now I want to turn to you, Hina Rabbani, Khar, because we have something happening in Europe with the Financial Action Task Force. We saw how the countries which have been the pillars of solidarity and support to Pakistan, like Saudi Arabia and China, that at the final hurdles, pulling back and not providing the unquestioned loyalty and friendship as you had before. So does that too, with the shifts in Washington and perhaps as well in Riyadh and Beijing, is Pakistan now having to find itself in an uncomfortable position in this new world, this new map, if you like?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's quite interesting how Mark put in the dynamics of a changing world. And I agree with him at some level. I think not in the last 3 years only, but for the last 3 decades or so, Pakistan has been playing that act of managing between what some people may call a status quo or a revisionist power in the form of the United States of America, even though the defense strategy paper called Russia and China, the revisionist power. So Pakistan has been trying to manage that relationship with the superpower, which is of supreme importance because of their presence in the region, and not only, again, a decade-old presence, but literally a 4-decade-old presence. And what Pakistan has always considered to be, both, interestingly, not only the government, but also the people of Pakistan has considered to be a real strategic ally, which is China. Now, interestingly, when Mark was talking about, the overall as to how he sees the world, there are three things which came to my mind. I just want to touch on that before we go on to specifically answer this question. What makes a superpower a superpower? And gives it the status of, or a viewer, the chance to believe that this superpower is on the rise, or is at least going to hold its status rather than lose its status, right? I think much of it has to do with three things. One is credibility. The US president recently tweeted about $33 billion that he had given to the United States of America. Credibility he loses, and with him the entire United States of America loses, because the records show that other than the CSF fund, which is close to $14 billion, which is reimbursement, the money since 2001, which includes the Camp David package, also that has actually been received and utilized and implemented in Pakistan, is $4.3 billion for military assistance and about $5.5 or $5.4 billion for civilian assistance. So that's very different than $33 billion. So to me, the credibility that this US superpower and its president must have is lost. The second thing that a superpower must give to the world, which holds the international world order, is the whole question of predictability, right? Because if a superpower is not predictable, then we can not have an international order. If a superpower decides to get out of the Paris Climate Agreement, then it is not the propagator and supporter of international order, international norms, but one which is not only staying there and not, it's the one which is breaking it in some ways. So unpredictability obviously also. Interestingly, also with it is some sound waves or bites and images that you see. So who would have thought? I mean, I can assure you, having worked with the administration of President Obama, I would have never thought that we would have a United States of America where the president's first family right now is representing, one of the kids is representing the USA in Korea and the other in India. And there is business and there's policy. There are long meetings between the presidents of those countries and the first family's kids, who may not have a role which, so these are very third worldly things, right? Mark mentioned that also. These are things that developing world countries do. And now you have the propagators, and the biggest holder of international world order, the superpower that you're all supposed to look at and learn from, really teaching us lessons on what not to do. And sorry for sort of dragging this on, but for me, having been the Foreign Minister of Pakistan, and there is countless lessons by European powers and America and everyone else on our international responsibility towards the refugees. It may not be the topic of today, refugees. It is the topic of 2 years back, or 3 years back. But how most European countries, barring Germany, treated refugees and how they assumed their international responsibility and all the lovely things that the UN has impinged upon us was quite interesting, and how Pakistan is still expected to ensure that 3.5 million or 2.5 million or 2 billion, whatever the numbers we may, depending on which numbers we're looking at, Afghan refugees are Pakistan's responsibility, even if they are in some ways creating security trouble, etc., etc., etc. So that's, and then the third one was obviously that are they holding universal values? I think that point really. That's it. On all those counts, I think the US, instead of setting the stage, is the one which is almost holding stakes to break the order that it itself was the biggest beneficiary of. So it wasn't countries like Pakistan that benefited from it, or even countries like China. It was the countries which were the biggest beneficiaries of this international order, and the single most important beneficiary is the same country which is now breaking that international order. So we are living in fantabulously interesting times. I mean, we will not be short of interesting things happening. But now going to the fact fiasco in some ways, and what the lesson learned for Pakistan. Now, for Pakistan, looking at the US and trying to manage relations is a very interesting thing. And again, I would just like to take the opportunity to say that whereas the US has made many mistakes and has done everything it has and tried to sort of put the entire blame on Pakistan of its misadventure in Afghanistan, currently Pakistan's ties with the US are a very big lesson for Pakistan itself, and I'll tell you why. Because I believe that one of the major fault lines of our foreign policy management in the last many decades, since 1948 literally, has been that we've tried to manage our region through superpowers and other powers, through countries which are oceans and seas away, and try to get, for instance, the Kashmir resolution through DC, and try to normalize our relations with Afghanistan through London and DC together, perhaps, okay? And try and manage our relations with Iran under the shadow of our dependence on Saudi Arabia. Okay? I believe these are fatalistic mistakes that Pakistan has made over the last many decades, all military and other regimes included. Now, we've reached the point where Kabul is managing DC for Pakistan. What is happening in Kabul has a long, dark, deep shadow on what Pakistan's ties with the US are. So bilateral ties with the US, I mean, this is really work for a great study because it has cast a broad, dark, deep shadow on the ties with the US. And now, no matter how hard we try on the bilateral track, what happens in Afghanistan is this. And I have a view that Pakistan is obviously overblamed for the, for instance, how can you explain the 3,000% increase in the production of opium? That clearly is not what Pakistan has done. And when Pakistan is constantly blamed for sending terrorists, well, Pakistan is taking a position on that. Pakistan has put in a $1,000 post over there. So you have $45 billion per annum going into Afghanistan from the United States, etc., and you can only build 200 border posts. Strategically speaking, if my fear is that terrorists are coming from the other side into my territory, and that is what is creating the problem in Afghanistan, then the first thing I will do is to ensure that the border is secure. And the fact that in the last 17 years, we have seen efforts by Americans and Afghans and everyone else to ensure that those border posts are never really put and that security fragile is never there makes me think many things. So on the fact thing, I think so the lesson learned for Pakistan is this, and the lesson learned for Pakistan also is, and I say it with utmost seriousness, and I think this is a lesson that we learn from private relationships also. Do not test your friends to an extent where you become a source of embarrassment, not a source of pride, joy, and strength for them, for heaven's sake. And how many times will you test, but put a burden on your friends to make them think, is this a liability or is this a strategic relationship?
You think this is what's happening now?
I think that's exactly what is happening now. So you cannot, we are all members of the United Nations. If the United Nations, rightly, wrongly, I'm proud to have, as a representative of country, not a, I have managed, post-Salala, this country managed to get Pakistan elected on the Security Council. We have goodwill in the world, in the United Nations, in the world, right? So it's not that there is a dearth of goodwill for Pakistan, but Pakistan must not trust that goodwill.
Do you think the goodwill for Pakistan in the world is diminishing, or it's staying stable, or is it fluctuating? How do you see it?
I think it would be entirely incorrect, even if diplomatically correct, to say that the goodwill of Pakistan in the world has not diminished in the last few decades. And I think that has to do with many of the decisions that we took, and that has also to do with many of the conditions within the geostrategic paradigm within the region that were created for us. And we were, in some ways, a negative externality, a beneficiary or a victim of the negative externality of the geostrategic games that were being played in our region.
Okay. So that introduces some other considerations for us about Pakistan and its place in the world. You use this phrase, you brought Afghanistan into our map and how Kabul is being managed from DC. I want to bring you in here, Zahid, because a lot of the approaches to Pakistan, some of the criticism that he's now coming out of Washington, if not at the capital, is about what's happening or not happening in Afghanistan. And Zahid, you've just come from there. And Zahid, I mean, better than most of this, Afghanistan's always been a geopolitical playing field, and how does it seem now, given the kind of pressures and changes we've seen sketched by both Mark Leonard and Hina Rabbani?
Well, actually, there's a wonderful book written by a former CIA special chief who was there in Pakistan from 1999 to 1983. And his book's name is 88 Days from Kandahar, the Bob area. And what he says actually is quite prophetic. And I think that's what Afghanistan is today. He said that Americans have already fought 2 wars in Afghanistan, not one. The first war started in 2001, December, and it continued in 2004. To some extent, one can say that Americans did achieve their objective, that they threw out Taliban government and they pushed Al-Qaeda out of Afghanistan. But soon after 2004, when the Taliban insurgency started, that the Americans went into second World War. And that is basically remains indecisive. No one has done. But the more actually gloomy actually is that what he feared, that America get into a third of war. And that exactly happened when after America had decided to pull out troops from Afghanistan. Now there is surging troops. And it seems that it will increase further. And also actually one can say that the situation in Afghanistan is worse than what we have seen in 2002-2003. Where actually, even a few years ago, things were better. Now what's happening is becoming much more complex. Afghanistan situation, because a few years ago, there was actually among the surrounding countries, among the neighboring countries, there was a desire to have that some kind of stability should return to Afghanistan. And it was actually in the interest of all the countries. But now it seems that we are going back to 1990s, where the neighboring countries are deeply getting involved in Afghanistan. It's not, well, Pakistan has already been there, but now look actually what's happening there. Iran's relations with Kabul government has been very good. But lately we have also seen that Taliban, they have also started in a way, actually, I'm not saying that they want actually Taliban to take over Afghanistan. But certainly there's some kind of support coming from them too. Then actually Russia. Russia has increasingly becoming much more deeply involved in Afghanistan. And Russia's main concern is about rise of Daesh in Afghanistan, and particularly if you see, for the last few years, the insurgency has extended to northern Afghanistan, which is borders Central Asian country. And it's not the Taliban, but basically the new emerging ISIS, which has been involved in most of those attacks. The rise of Daesh itself says a lot. And that's what we have seen, that the attacks have become much more fierce, much more bloody, and we have not seen in the Taliban period that citizens were targeted, but now actually it's free for all. And then actually China is there. So China's interest is that that it should be some kind of stability. It has a good relation with both the Taliban and Kabul government, and that's one of the reasons why they are also a part of the quadrilateral process which is going on. It's off and on. There has not been any meeting recently. But I think both Kabul government and Americans want Taliban to get involved in that. But now actually with American troops increasing, it seems that still there is no exit strategy. There is no actually, it's not clear what the Americans really want in Afghanistan. There has been search, there has been massive increase in attacks. There is about almost 200 to 300% increase in the aerial attacks. Night raids have increased. So, but basically a big question, whether this military solution really provides a long-term stability in Afghanistan, and that's not going to happen. So there is no desire of any political settlement. Now another one actually which is very is basically now Afghanistan also becoming a kind of Pakistan is also becoming a war of sanctuaries. If you look actually, yes, Pakistan has been blamed for providing sanctuary to the Taliban, and they are, the Taliban leaders have been operating, so there is no doubt about that. But now actually this Afghan soils have become a sanctuary for Pakistani insurgents. So in a way actually the entire region is becoming much more unstable. We don't see anything happening soon. And when I went to Kabul this time, it's quite, quite depressing. I started covering Afghanistan way back in 1992, when Najibullah government was still in power. So I've seen the different phases of war, civil war in Afghanistan. But here the uncertainty is much greater.
Well, you said you're not sure what the American strategy and interests are in Afghanistan. Is it clearly what Pakistan's strategic interests are? Now we see again increasing pressure from Washington to move against the Afghani network. And of course, greater criticism from Ashraf Ghani, president. How do you see it now briefly?
Yes, Pakistan also does not have any strength, Afghanistan, for sure. But largely is also because, if one is not sure what the Americans are going to do in Afghanistan. So obviously a country which is about 100 kilometers, border, that must be concerned. I'm not suggesting that whatever we have been doing is right. Actually, we have just been driven by kind of more reactive policy, and it's also like taking our options, that kind of thing. So, so yes, actually that has also created its own problem. But what is basically the important thing is that, and I think what probably Americans have never tried to do, is that it could not have been possible that any peace movement of Pakistan-Afghanistan cooperation, I think Americans should have from very outset, when they were there actually, they should have tried to actually bring the two countries together. And because now distrust, the whole of distrust is massive. When you go to Kabul, I've never heard any person speaking or uttering any favorable words for Pakistan. That's the situation there. I've seen many people who have been, who are born here, they got education here, and some of them are also the member of the cabinet. And one of them I met actually recently. He is also deputy minister, and he went to Kabul for the first time in 2004 because his family came here and lived there. So that's a problem. Then obviously things are getting worse. If Americans are facing Pakistan, but a big question mark whether it will deliver anything.
That's always the question. So a very messy proxy war in Afghanistan. It was ever thus, but as Zahid said, it's getting even more messier with more countries piling in and supporting both sides of this very, very brutal war. I'm going to bring you in now, Christopher, because Pakistan is also getting dragged in, or there's an attempt to drag Pakistan into even messier proxy wars, and that's in the Middle East. And the thread which does that, or the alliance, which is through Saudi Arabia. And the fact that Pakistan has now been put under pressure to contribute troops to the Islamic coalition based in Riyadh, and of course the former Army General Rahim Sharif is there. That has pressures for Pakistan, but also pressures for its relationship with its other neighbor, which is Iran. Can you just bring us in, just enlighten us a little bit about this relationship, Pakistan, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and how the difficult juggling act there, because it does have repercussions and consequences.
I'm going to begin with an apology. Some of you this morning at 11:15 would have been under the impression that there was going to be a talk about the Islamic Enlightenment, my book. I ate a lovely dinner last night, went to sleep in the Gymkhana Club, which I can recommend. And I awoke to the sound of birdsong and people hitting golf balls outside my window. I looked at my watch and it said 12, and I thought, that can't be right. I went to the door. There was a hotel employee cleaning the corridor. I said, "Kitna baje hain?" "Bara baje hain." "Oh, bahut bada afsoos." I'm very, very sorry for those who were expecting that talk. And as if in validation of the theory that if a butterfly flaps its wings in the Galapagos, the effects are felt in the Arctic, I must also apologise to my fellow panellists, because here I am, I've been invited in, and I'm crowding their panel. They've very graciously accepted me, so thank you for that. The Iran-Saudi relationship is of course important in Pakistan. Iran, and I've lived there for many years, has a view of the world, or has had a view of the world, which sees the Pakistan, India and Afghanistan region as an essential part of its hinterland. Cultural hinterland, of course, but also strategic and geopolitical. Its eyes are faced west. And this has been built into the structure of the foreign policy of the Islamic Republic of Iran ever since the revolution. It has always been the case. When they came to power, the mullahs said, neither east nor west, but Islamic Republic. That wasn't the case. They were looking west. Why were they looking west? Because they had a fixed enemy on the horizon, and that was the United States, with its satellites, with Israel, and the Europeans, but in particular, it was the United States hostility that essentially regulated affairs within the Islamic Republic of Iran and also its foreign policy. So when you talk about, as we've heard now, this vacuum that is being created by uncertainty, with respect to American foreign policy, that vacuum is also felt in Iran. But for the powers that be in Iran, American hostility, American enmity was useful, as long as it was kept at a certain threshold. It could justify all sorts of policies at home, and of course this ethos of American hostility allowed Iran to raise its head in the world and to say to the world, while you're taking American dollars, while you're receiving American visitors, while you're allowing the Americans to call your ambassador in Washington and say, you will do this, we're not doing any of that. And so this is our claim to virtue. And when President Ahmadinejad, who is so despised in the West, and so despised by many in Iran, when he was strutting his stuff on the world stage, Iran's prestige in that department was never higher. So I think, if you look at the Obama administration, it was very problematic for the Iranians, particularly those at the top, the hardliners, the conservatives, those who want to keep things the same. Because here was someone who was clearly an attractive personality, who wanted to achieve something and was using subtle means to do so. He was gradually rolling back from the idea of regime change. Regime change dropped off the American agenda, and it had been on the agenda during the Bush administration. And then he had an extraordinarily capacious worldview. He turned to the Saudis and said, look, you and Iran are the big powers in the region. You have major differences. I don't want to be running the region, you have to run the region. So at the end of the day, ultimately, you are going to have to sit down and you're going to have to sort out your differences. And in an important interview with The Atlantic, with Jeffrey Goldberg, which I'm sure many of you would have seen in his last year of office, he said, the Iranians and the Saudis have got to divide up the region. I paraphrase, but that is essentially what he said. And the Saudis were apoplectic. How is it possible that this country of Persians, this country that is constantly instigating trouble among our Shia minorities across the Arab world, this country that is causing so many problems in Syria, how can we possibly sit down with them? And now everything has changed. And I sense in the corridors of power in Iran a great uncertainty and a great trepidation because of the unpredictability that we've been talking about, because of the lack of credibility. When he talks, what does he mean? What are his intentions? And so you will find from the mouths of Iranian statesmen and politicians, even now, considerable caution with respect to Trump. How are we going to deal with this loose cannon? Now, the Iranians are very good at talking up their game. They have a good game, and they have a good way of talking about it. And if you look around the Iranian region, the greater Iranian region, the region that once upon a time was culturally highly affected by Iranian culture, then you see that they've made big inroads. We've heard about Afghanistan, and the extremely important part that they've played there, not only in setting up the post-Taliban dispensation, but also affecting it and moulding it, and making sure that it doesn't threaten its interests. This has now been sharpened by the Daesh threat. Because, well, I'll just look briefly at Pakistan and also India. When I was in India very recently, I was talking to people there about the Iranian relationship there. And they were saying, well, you did notice that Mr. Netanyahu was here last week. So this is an important thing. The Iranians, and then Netanyahu was selling a lot of arms. So in those discussions, you can imagine that the word Iran came up a great deal. How does that affect Iran's relationship with Pakistan? Well, of course, it has a big effect on Iran's relationship with Pakistan. And I believe that Iran doesn't have stable friendships, it has unstable alliances of convenience, into which Pakistan can form an important part. India likewise, Afghanistan likewise. Nothing in these relationships, in my opinion, is particularly stable. But to return to the question of Daesh, which I think is really not spoken about enough with respect to Iran. Iran has been Daesh's, and as you know, the Shias are way in advance of any other community in terms of being in Daesh's and its fellow travellers' crosshairs. And yet, how many times has the centre, the heartland of Iran, been targeted successfully by Daesh and its accomplices? Once. One major attack in Tehran. This is an extraordinary achievement, a testimony to Iran's security forces, its incredible intelligence, and its adept manipulation of political actors outside the country. And Iranians, although many of them despise the Revolutionary Guard, hate the idea that there's a strong military component to the regime that's lording it over them, at the same time are very appreciative of this line of defense, because they know that when Daesh was very, very powerful in Iraq, when it was literally a few kilometers away from the Iranian border, the heartlands of Iran were safe. Now that doesn't mean that the peripheries of Iran, the periphery of Iran is safe. Baluchistan is of course very vulnerable, Kurdistan is very, very vulnerable, and the Arab dominated areas in the south can also be penetrated. But I think that this is something that we need to think about as a constant in Iranian minds. The threat of Daesh and how we keep the interior of the country stable. And I would just leave you with this parting thought. Iran looks very powerful. It looks as though it has the upper hand in Syria. It looks as though, without trying very hard, it has the upper hand in Yemen, as well as the moral upper high ground. It looks very powerful in Afghanistan. But at home, there is a certain fragility. In the recent protests, there was a lot of concern expressed about Iran's external commitments. Why are you spending money on Syrians when we don't have enough to get by on? And that is a big tension within Iranian politics. And I think that looking forward, and particularly to the day when the current supreme leader passes away, then that is going to be front and centre, it's going to be increasingly important. So these are just some of the elements that I think should be borne in mind.
I think that extra sleep made your mind even sharper. Just very briefly, just so we have dropped in your thought yet, we don't have a lot of time left. But in the way in which Saudi Arabia is drawing its friends to be a source of strength in its battle in Yemen, which of course is a proxy war against Iran, will that have an effect of bringing Iran closer to Pakistan, or as we've seen in previous points in history, bringing them further apart?
I think Iran's commitment in Yemen is not a deeply felt commitment. I think the expenditure, both in material terms but also in political terms, has for Iran been relatively light. And I think a phased withdrawal from Yemen under honourable circumstances would be something that the Iranians are willing to contemplate. I mean, if you look around, if you look to the south, you look to the Persian Gulf region, you'll see Iran is constantly building bridges, having seen those bridges destroyed. There's a great flexibility in Iran's relationship with the Arab world. Essentially, Iran doesn't trust the Arab world. The only Arabs it trusts are its fellow Shias. And so there's a great flexibility built into that. I think the Pakistani relationship is in some ways a far more important long-term one, because there has been a long-term investment. There is an awareness of similar interests and similar cultural background. Again, just a final thought. For the Iranians, it is deeply, deeply insulting to be told by Arabs that because you're not an Arab, therefore we don't consider you, a 100%. Now, this is not a message they get from Pakistan or from places further east. There is a much greater cultural synergy, and I think that is something that is important.
One last little access, which we would be remiss if we didn't at least touch upon it, and I'm going to ask you, Hina, Rabbani, because you've seen it up close. When we were discussing before, the sense of relations between Delhi and Islamabad are perhaps the worst that they have been, and that says a lot. When you look at them with your eyes, what do you think now? Does that has an impact? Because it's threaded through all the other relationships we've talked about in this panel.
Okay, so in some ways, Delhi precedes DC in being a certain way, right? Delhi precedes DC in going back to a way of managing and defining your identity, which is antagonistic to, first of all, those around you, because a lot of what America, making America great again is antagonism against or for people within the region and outside. And that's what in some ways Delhi also did, because you see, when we look at India and Pakistan up till 1960s and 70s, perhaps Pakistan was doing well. We used to laugh about the Hindu rate of growth. Where Pakistan was going at 6 to 10, they were going at 1 to 2, etc. And then things changed. Okay, I believe the biggest change for Pakistan was the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and our ability or our allowing our soil to be used to train Mujahideen, etc., who later became Frankensteins that we ourselves could not control. So Delhi is known, what made India great was secular India. What made India great was an India which was encompassing the Hindus, Muslims, treating them all together. Now you have an India which has in Kashmir a policy which includes rape of women, using pedicants to blind people, using state authority to ensure that people, to literally kill people. You have lynchings in the streets of Mumbai, etc. And that is Modi's India, right? So when you say Delhi and Islamabad, why are relations where they are? I think India has changed far more in the last 5 years since I was managing the portfolio than Pakistan has. In some ways, Pakistan, if anything, I believe that if you look at the trajectories of the two countries, Pakistan, I do truly believe, and I'm not only trying to be diplomatically correct over here, I do truly believe that we are going from dark, deep shades of grey to some light shades of grey and hopefully reach white in terms of our policy towards not having any space for any sanctuaries for allowing people to use violence, which is supposed to be an authority of the state, by entities which we thought were good to our state, but perhaps not good for other states. So I think our policy on that, we may not be able to implement it completely, but we have started the journey, we've started the journey strong and good. In India, it's actually a reversal of the good India into a bad Hindutva, Modi-dominated India. So India, Pakistan, I think in the current circumstances, until and unless, simultaneously, what does it take for the Pakistan-India relations to normalize and, first improve and then normalize? It takes two statesmen to exist at the same time in both countries. So if either of them And currently Modi has proved, I mean, I was one of the people who said a stronger prime minister, even if he is an extremist prime minister, is better than a weaker prime minister such as Manmohan Singh, who had great intentions but was not able to implement those great intentions. Whether he called establishing the Mountain of Peace, was not able to deliver the Mountain of Peace. So I was very, I was hopeful that Modi, once he becomes prime minister, will not be the drug killing Modi, but a statesman, an Indian prime minister who would want to build a legacy. Modi has chosen not to do that. So in the current circumstances, frankly speaking, I would look at handling the situation, not to escalate into further violence and bloodshed. You have seen Mr. Rawat, who is the Indian Army Chief, make statements which are exceptionally hostile, which a state functionary will not be able to. So, whereas India is blaming Pakistan for many things, I think India is currently looking like a state which is trying to be almost a state which is moving outside of international law and becoming a terrorist state in some ways. And that is very, very seriously dangerous when the sitting army chief says that it is our policy and we will go cross the LOC and go and do whatever we do. So then, again, the world disorder is happening within the region also. When international law does not comply, nations who go by whatever we have ascribed to, it's a very, very seriously dangerous point.
So, ladies and gentlemen of the Lahore Literary Festival, we've heard about a rules-based international order, a liberal order, which is under challenge. We've heard from Hina about rulers who are neither predictable nor credible, about traditional friendships being tested and enemies being even greater enemies now. And from Zahid and Christopher, we heard about wars within regions. So, as you sit here in Lahore, show me by your hands, how many of you now are even more worried about the world in which we live than, say, you were last year? How many of you are more worried about this war? Ooh la la. Ladies and gentlemen of Lahore and beyond, how many of you have confidence in our institutions and the rules by which govern them and the leaders who run the world around us? Any optimistic voices up there? My goodness. Oh la la, there's a man with a lovely white kurta on and he's so optimistic. And where was? With two hands up. Sorry, you only count as one person. Mark, I'm going to go back to you as the master cartographer. You've been taking notes from all of our distinguished commentators. What would you take? We filled in the map a little bit more. Would you like a last comment?
I think maybe for me what's most interesting about this Right. So, I think the thing which I take from it is the kind of mind-blowing complexity of all of these relationships once you remove a hegemonic power that structures relationships between different people. And we're talking, we spent an hour talking about a world of proxy wars, of people getting involved in each other's internal politics, of all of the things which are meant to be providing some sort of structure and defense against conflict actually being instrumentalized, whether it's international law or trade or the internet or even migration. These things are being instrumentalized by different players, proxy wars, hacking. I mean, it's a very, very complicated world where there's both no great power structuring the relations between different countries, but also the nature of statehood is changing in fundamental ways. And to link this session to the first session, one of the really interesting things that seems to be driving it is a kind of return of identity politics and a sense that in a world where things aren't going well, where the global pie might be shrinking, people are thinking more about how they can keep hold of their bit of the pie, and that brings identity into the fore. So, yeah, sadly, not the most uplifting session in the world, but I think it does show how important it is to get beyond the kind of full slogans and statements and actually really understand all of the different players in a much messier and a more complex world that are interacting in different ways with shifting alliances between different countries. And in some ways, that is a world which we were more familiar with before the First World War and feels very, very different to the world that we've had over the last few decades.
Yes, a world very much in flux that's fluid, which both raises both risks and opportunities, and how one wishes the opportunities were greater than the risks. But there are opportunities too. Now, like the doomsday clock, we're 2 minutes before the hour, and I think it would be remiss if I didn't allow someone in the audience to ask a question. And I want to ask the person who's going to ask the best question, but also I think let the question go to someone who's under 30. You're the next generation, you inherit this earth. Now all the hands go up to people who are pretending to be 30. Now, you want to do this? I'm the volunteer. Do you have 5 minutes? Oh, wow, present time. Whoever is going to ask that nuclear question cannot now say, oh wow, I'll have a really long question. Short, sharp question. This gentleman here with the striped shirt got my attention first, but I want to make sure that it's not someone who... Okay, let's get here. You better be good. And your name?
Leonard. I'm a student of English literature.
Good.
And my question is this, that India and America have, like India, if America has a policy of American first, and now the Modi government is on the stand that Hindu first. Is these two policies are compatibly motivated by one thought, or they are antagonistic towards their regional power, or they have something in their mind that they are going to change the world order, and it is how it is affecting the globalization era. We are living in the globalization era. If we are saying that American first, if we are saying that Hindu Mata first, then what's it going to affect the world order?
A+ question. Okay. I'm going to hold, because you've spoken, I'm going to just give, do you want to just have a little, an effort to answer that question, Zahid, or you're too busy clapping for the question?
No, I don't think that this is basically American policy is driven by, not American policy, I would say Trump's policy is driven by so-called anti-globalism. So that is reflected in what it is doing. I'll just quote one and that explains everything. Recently, Trump gave an interview to Fox TV, his favorite one. And when he was asked about his views on foreign policy, he said, it's me. It's all about me. And then he said, you may call it meism. This is basically a foreign policy driven by meism. And so I don't know whether it can last long because it's hurting the long-term American interest also, the world order. And then actually this kind of weird world order Trump wants to build.
I just want to very quickly add it because I think what Zahid Saab said is exactly correct. It's not America first and Hindu first. It is Trump first and Modi first. It is what is appeasing and appealing to the electorate and not to the nation state and the glory of either India, because in my view, both of them are actively persevering to take the glory away from what made it great. So what makes America great is what he's trying to do. And I just want to end also, because that's a slightly the more serious part is that the alignment that you see of India and the United States of America within the region is rare, is correct, and Pakistan needs to grow up and understand it and take it as a reality, accept it, internalize it, and learn to live with it. And the reason for that alignment is not because they love each other, because he wears pink stripes with Obama's name written over it. That's not the reason. The reason is South China Sea. And the reason is containment of China and Iran at the same time by alignment with India. So it's all geostrategy made. It's alignments which are happening because of interest that nation states have. We just need to grow up, understand it, as I said, internalize it, really learn to respect the reality that is staring us in the face. I think we still not do that.
So I think I've got 2 minutes in hand, and I don't want to be a dictator in a country which has fought all of its life for democracy. But if there just happened to be a woman under 30 who wants to ask a question, I may actually give the floor to that person. You're the man who put your 2 hands up. Okay, if there's no woman who wants to ask. Okay, all right. We'll let you have a say in a second. Yes. Quick question from you, and your name, please. Do you have a microphone?
No, I don't. Just get up.
Can we pass a microphone here to the lovely lady, the lovely green?
I think I'm loud enough to be heard by everyone. I hope so. Yeah.
Most of us.
Okay.
Yeah.
So hi, my name is Khatija. The question is actually for Hina, Rabbani, Khar. You are former, former minister.
Okay. Your name is Khadija. Your question is for Hina, Rabbani, Khar.
Yeah. My question is the fact that US and India have very good strategic relationships which work out well for them. We apparently have the same with China and Saudi Arabia, but when it comes to real matters like being put on the grey list by the FATF and other matters, they choose not to vote for us or they choose to remain quiet. So what is Pakistan's stance in the current climate and what should we wait forward, because except for Turkey, no one chooses to stand by us?
I honestly think I have adequately answered that question, but I will repeat myself in saying that we need to see what we are asking of our friends. Are we asking them, every relationship is about win-win. A strategic alliance is based on gains which must happen or be realized on both sides. So if one side is asking too much of the other, and for instance, to give you an example, if one side has categorically and consistently and persistently for over the last 4 to 5 to 10 years asked a certain strategic ally of it who happens to be a member of, the P5 to ensure that prescribed organizations which have been prescribed by the Security Council, whose elements may exist in this country, they should come and support us once and twice and thrice. The fourth time they start asking you, why don't you just fix it? Why do you continue to test us so much or continue to embarrass us in front of other member states also? So I think I would not look at it as our friends turning away from us. I would look at it as us expecting the impossible from countries that we consider to be our friends. And I think if we want, this is very important, I think if we want strategic relationships to continue to be truly strategic and not just be a strategic partnership. For instance, I just want to say that I think it's important. We are today the NATO ally, most favored NATO ally. What's the status called? The non-NATO ally of the US. Does it look like we are a non-NATO ally of the US? You know how many countries have that? Very few. But are we a serious non-NATO ally of the US, or are we being taken to practically every forum and embarrassed and humiliated, etc.? So if we need to correct course, and then expect not the impossible, but the possible and the respectable from our friends. I think it will be completely unfair.
Ladies and gentlemen, the time is gone, but to the only optimist in the room, you get 20 seconds to convince all of us. Very quickly. 20 seconds.
Right, okay, my name is Nawaz.
And your name is?
Nawaz.
Nawaz.
And I rose my both hands because I have confidence in every ruler of the world except the honorable ruler of the USA.
Okay, 20 seconds.
My question is that
yes.
Why Pakistan is expected to dance to the tunes of American needs? If some fighters are needed to fight against the Soviet Union for the US, then Pakistan. What happened to this?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I can start. Then if some soldiers, some volunteers are needing to fight against the US, against the Soviet Union, then Pakistan becomes a good market to recruit and to train some fighters, and they are named as sacred fighters and mujahideen.
Okay.
But once that need is over,